we have no real media in this state. Well, you have us.
It's really time for a parent revolution.
Never let a good crisis go to waste. That's what the left did with COVID in so many different ways.
Wind energy, especially offshore wind, is a big loser and just another government boondoggle.
Like, what's going on?
People are fed up. They lied to us then. They're lying to us now. They're assaulting our families.
What we do is we look at the lies of the left that they keep pushing out, that America doesn't work for black people. That is not true.
They want to now monopolize truth and say, truth is only what we say truth is. Damn the data, damn the science.
The key with science is it always needs to serve objective thinking. They just call anyone who challenges them a science deniers.
They're evil.
Shut up or we'll cancel you.
What we're going through is a cultural revolution.
This is big, and this is how change begins.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Ocean State Current Command Bunker. Now playing from in the dugout, number 37, Mike Stenhouse.
Just another Wuhan Wednesday. Wish it was the same day. Just another Wuhan Wednesday. Wish it was the same day. Just another Wuhan Wednesday.
Hey folks, on this Wuhan Wednesday, we're going to dispel yet another myth from the left and from big government advocates. The myth is that we can tax and spend and lawmakers can pass more increases and more fees and impose more regulations and more red tape. And, it really doesn't matter. It's just more free money for the government and there's just more advocacy towards, left-leaning agendas. But, in reality, there is an impact that affects our economy and our state and the real lives of actual residents. Despite all the happy talk from Rhode Island's ruling class, the governor, the legislature, Rhode Island's oppressive anti-business and anti-family policies, they're coming home to roost. They're causing our ocean state to sink into a recession. And this, according to my guest, and one of our state's top economic experts, he's URI Professor Len Lardaro, another myth from the left destroyed right here in Rhode Island. Hey, folks, welcome to In the Dugout. And we welcome back today PhD economist and URI Professor of Economics, creator of the Current Conditions Index, Professor Len Lardaro. Len, welcome back to In the Dugout.
Hi, nice to be here.
You said in your most recent Current Conditions Index that reluctantly, and you didn't want to say it, but you finally have to make the claim that you believe Rhode Island is in a recession. Tell us why.
The evidence is just overwhelming. That for a while it was kind of building and building, but the way that I constructed my index, it's 12 broadly based indicators. And what I have is that if the percentage of the 12 that are doing better than a year ago, that would be in the expanding range. 6 right, which is 50%, is neutral. Less than 50% would be contraction. And we've been largely in contraction for this whole calendar year. We bounced a couple of times to neutral, but if you look under the hood, there's some really, really bad and weak numbers. Now, not the end of the world. We haven't fallen off a cliff, but recession is not about levels. It's about sustainability of levels. And I think that what's happening is that Rhode Island is, slightly kind of going downhill, and we're not going to be able to sustain things. If you look at, for example,
let's just look here. Just look here. I mean, look at this. Every month to year comparison, we are significantly below where we were last year. So you're right. Absolutely. It's about sustaining. Yeah. Right.
That's a big part of it, sustaining, and even some economic indicators that are not included here are just really weak. Continuing claims trending higher. Some of the ones I have, layoffs in terms of new claims trending higher. Benefit exhaustions, long-term unemployment trending higher. And, there's just a whole range of things that are not doing terribly well. And so as a group, you look at it because you never make an assessment or recession call based on one thing or one or two indicators. But looking at the whole group, they've been in the weak range and contracting for quite a while. And some of the numbers the last few months have just been really, really disappointing. And so we're not only below last year, but we're notably below last year. And there's not much showing strength. Ironically, retail sales is one of them. But if you think about it, part of the reason retail sales are strong in Rhode Island is not necessarily anything we're doing. Remember that a lot of Rhode Islanders commute to Massachusetts and they bring their money back with them. And so all that extra money pads our housing market, retail sales, the unemployment rate's lower than it would have been, and so if you go beyond that. But the other point too is the national economy is weakening, and we're very dependent on the national economy. We did virtually nothing to make ourselves more competitive after the pandemic. We just dished out the $1.1 billion. And so here we are, largely flat-footed and overly dependent on the national economy. So it's not where we want to be, but it's where we placed ourselves. And that's part of the thing I've been saying. Yeah. We should never have gotten here.
And many states, as I've talked in other shows, we won't get into detail here, but many states are proactively taking steps to make themselves more competitive, to make themselves a desired home for investors, for families, for students, or whatever. But Rhode Island just keeps going down this same old path. We're going to get into some of that a little bit later when we speculate about what's causing it and what could we do about it. But your index, you've been at URI for over 4 decades now. Is that right?
Yes.
And you've been doing this current conditions index for about 3 decades, right?
Since the early 90s, yeah.
Since the early 90s. And you say in here that you've been really surprised and pleased at how accurate your current conditions index has been over the decades. Tell us just a little bit about that.
Yeah, if you look at the performance and things, it leads recessions, but it's coincident with recoveries, which is just great. So this is actually signal that we're in recession before people really know it. And what happens too, if the numbers start to decline, it's almost like our recovery or whatever is standing on fewer legs. And so we're lowering. And so the rate of growth is slowing. And that's what's been happening now. So it really has worked out well. Think of the 12 indicators, each has a leg to stand on. The fewer that are improving, the fewer legs we're standing on, the less, strength we have as far as the recovery goes. And so, that's something. And boy, since December, we went to kind of neutral and then just been really awful. I don't know what happened in February, or rather March 16. I still can't figure that out. We bounced, but these are very disturbing numbers. And so even, sometimes you get a number, it's not a good number for the index, but underneath the hood, there's some very strong performances. We only had a couple now. Manufacturing this month was not too bad, and retail sales and things. So, but a lot of the other stuff just didn't come through, and other ones show slowing. But there's other things too, like resident employment is not doing well. If you look at our labor force, we're back to striking the labor force.
Resident employment means jobs based in Rhode Island?
No, that's payroll employment. Resident is anywhere. Okay. And so in-state and out-of-state, and that actually has benefited a lot from living next to Massachusetts and Connecticut, for our people and stuff. So that's not doing well. If you look at the number of jobs in Rhode Island, the media only reports the change in employment. And if you look on my indicator on the right-hand side there, I have what you should be looking at, which is job gains and job losses, because the aggregate number, if you take a look there, look at the job churn.
Where are we looking? Where are we looking here? Oh, here
right
we
where
go.
your mouse is. Yeah, the job churn. Yep. And so what you see is that even though the gains are still okay, the losses have been creeping up. And that's so that we're getting to a net change that's smaller and smaller, that I strongly suspect eventually is going to go negative, not just because of the cyclical things, but to some extent because businesses are going to have to make adjustments to employment to kind of preserve their margins based on the tariff. So, that we really should report this stuff. It never gets reported except for me. And that's so you should look at the gains and losses, not the net change. And the losses are going up.
All right, let's stay on jobs for a few more things. Now, our official unemployment rate is 4.6%, but we've commented on it often. Justin Katz, who used to do research with us, we used to comment how it's sort of a misleading statistic because if the labor force goes down, which is not a good thing,
Right.
it actually benefits the unemployment rate. So something bad shouldn't produce something good. So you say the real unemployment rate in Rhode Island, if we take into account labor force participation, is 6% or higher.
6.1, yeah. And I've been doing that for a while because we went from double digits after the pandemic down to about 2.8. And those are just bogus numbers because we had unemployed people dropping out of the labor force. In other states, what you would have had, robust employment growth would be driving it, not us. Resident employment and unemployed were both going down. So you got that aberration of a low unemployment rate. So I started publishing that participation adjusted rate. And that's the one to really look at. We haven't been below 6% for quite a while, even though the official number, which is really meaningless. But the problem then is so much of the media, I made a wisecrack in the report, so much of the media just focuses on the unemployment rate, which is not only a lagging indicator, which is bad, it's really negatively biased because of our labor force going down.
So the official rate of 4.6, which I just agreed is not a real accurate account, but even that is not good compared to the rest of America and many states around us. So even with that, and then if you add the participation rate to it, I assume we are way behind national and regional and other state trends.
Yeah, we're not doing well. Let's just put it that way. So, yeah, I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat that. I look at the 6.1 as a much more accurate depiction. So our labor market is not as strong as that 4.6 would say. And the thing to really look at, which I also publish, and I don't know why DLT doesn't, the employment rate. That's probably the most important statistic no one's ever heard of. That's also on the right side near the job churn. And that's the percentage of the population that's employed, whether it's in-state or out-of-state. And so we're well below where we were. If you look at that employment rate, 60.8, we were as high as 65.2 all the way back in 2007. Participation rate, we were at 68.5 in January of 07. We're down to 63.7. So these are things that the employment rate is really the concerning one. And that's something, it sounds esoteric. I tried to see if DLT would publish that. They don't want to, and that's their choice. But that's the one to look at. And our employment rate has been going down. And so, that's probably a much better number than the unemployment rate.
I agree. We agree with you fully on that. And we used to do something called the Jobs and Opportunity Index, which is a little more backward looking. Yours is more of a forward looking indicator. Yep. One of the things that jumped out at me was what you call benefit exhaustions. I assume that means people running out of health and pension benefits. And you say that's reflective of longer term unemployment, and benefit exhaustions, according to your calculations, rose by over 30% this month. Wow, that's pretty stunning.
And hey, it's been going up double digit for quite a while now. And that's benefits of unemployment insurance only. So unemployment insurance benefit exhaustion. But unemployment that's probably the best measure in the near term of long-term unemployment we have. And so I have layoffs, which is new claims. That's the best measure for that. Benefit exhaustions, which is longer term unemployment. And so both of those are not doing terribly well. And then employment service jobs, which includes temps. And that's a leading indicator for future employment. That's been going down. At least it was flat compared to a year ago this month, but nothing to write home about. So, if you look at the labor market and then you add to that non-CCI indicators like continuing claims clearly trending up, there's just a preponderance of evidence that says, we're not falling off a cliff, but we're slipping.
All right, so let's get into a little more speculative area, but let me just wrap up. So you're basically saying since last December, when your indicator was neutral, had gone, good positive signs for most of last year, and then in December it goes down, and then much of this year is in the red. I mean, really low red numbers. Yeah. You're basically saying that we've been or started going into recession last December.
Yeah, I think that's the best that's the best estimate. December, maybe January, either way. But, I think that this year, calendar year, we have been in a recession. It's not necessarily deep yet, but it's persistent. And so we're not going to be able to sustain even some of the levels we've had. And we're going to see continuing weakness in a lot of the different indicators, not just the CCI indicators, but a lot of the other ones that I just discussed earlier.
And we also have this troubling trend in Rhode Island of being the first in and last out of recessions. And we're going to get into why in just a second, or why you and I think why, but is Rhode Island being in a recession an indicator that maybe the whole national economy is going into recession?
Believe it or not, that's happened before. And you can look at this a couple of ways. Number one, Rhode Island can be in a recession and the U.S. isn't in a recession. That's happened. But also, and a couple of times in the past, we actually went into recession not long before, but before the national economy did, which ironically would make Rhode Island's economy a leading indicator for national growth. But I wouldn't say that.
All right, so they're not always linked together. But what usually does happen, if there is a national recession, okay, if there is, Rhode Island is usually the first one in and the last one out. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, normally we're pretty much the first one in. This time, ironically, and I didn't see the methodology, but I know them and I trust them, that there are supposedly 20 states currently in recessions. Now, again, I just heard the result. I don't know what that is, but so we're tied for first. But the point is, the first is still there, and that's troubling. And what did we do post-pandemic to make ourselves more competitive, to make ourselves more resilient against national slowdowns? We didn't. We just distributed $1.1 billion, and so we let that go. So our cyclical vulnerability has been as strong as ever, and that's a problem. We're dealing with some structural things, but they take time. So in the meantime, we're largely at the hands of the national and global economies.
I want to come back to some of what you just said, but first I saw this post you had put up a few months ago.
That was amazing.
Over 20 years, we've lost almost half of our manufacturing employment.
Yep. But our production has not gone down anywhere near that much. In other words, productivity is much, much higher. And that's what's needed for manufacturing firms to survive. I've talked to people in Rhode Island. They said, and this was a few years back, that we can produce 20% more with the same number of hours worked that we did 5 or 10 years ago.
Okay.
And I think AI is going to speed that up. So that's productivity they overlooked.
Well, that's good on the one hand, and I'm sure all states see that. But the fact that we're losing so many manufacturing jobs is not good. All right. So now we ask why? Why over recent decades have we lost all these manufacturing jobs?
Yeah.
Why is Rhode Island in a recession? Why are we, if there is a national recession, first in and last out? What do you say, Professor Lardaro? Why?
Well, we lost a lot of manufacturing jobs like the rest of the country. A large part of that was technological progress. That for American firms to be competitive, they had to adopt labor-saving technology. That was a part of it. A part of it was foreign competition, obviously. A fair amount of that went to China, whatever, as well, and other countries in Asia, et cetera. So a big part of that, technology and trade, had a lot to do with that. And, why is Rhode Island hitting a recession sooner than other states? That's a more difficult one. But if you look at our business climate, it's not so difficult to see. You and I have spoken about this how many times? What I really find, if you've seen, and you've written about those 50 state comparisons, and those are all garbage. They're adding apples and oranges. They don't really make any sense. But what is disturbing for Rhode Island, all those 50 state comparisons have different criteria and different weights, and they all end up the same place. That says to me, we've got some major structural baggage that we haven't dealt with. And that's a problem. Years ago, I found a regularity in any 50 state economic comparison. Rhode Island will tend toward its alphabetical ranking of 42. It's amazingly accurate.
Well, CNBC puts us at 46th in top states for business. The Tax Foundation, a little better at 39th, although we're dropping there. And Wallet Hub, as far as best states to start a business, has Rhode Island last place, 50th.
Yep.
So you're right. It all averages out to somewhere in the low to mid 40s. And it's not just this year. I mean, this has been for decades, right? We've been in the bottom of this for decades. All right. So what makes for a bad business climate, Professor? High taxes. What else?
Well, I'll give you two things that Rhode Island truly excels at: fees and regulations. Now, the problem is for the rest of the world, those are negatives, but we're really good at that stuff. And I've spoken to some people upstate and they
Really
said,
good at bad stuff.
yeah, we do great. We have no peers, you know. But I spoke to some people upstate because I'd always recommended we're such a small state. Why don't we act like it? Take some business surveys, see what they figure are the good things, the bad things, what needs to change. And they said they had done some surveys and no one complained about regulation. I didn't have the heart to tell them. That's probably self-selection. Probably your sample that responded wasn't upset. But if you did that, I mean, we really have to go after regulations and fees. The cost of doing business here is difficult, but it gets made worse because of something you don't normally think of a cost of doing business, the lack of skills of our labor force, which makes hiring, training, and retraining fairly expensive.
All right,
You know,
so
it's
education
hidden
is a
things.
fact. Education's a factor. We just don't have
Absolutely.
a good labor force to offer.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's parts of it that are great, but remember, parts of it get rented out to Connecticut and Massachusetts 5 days a week. You know, we
All right,
redefine brain drain.
let's just hit quickly on a few, just a quick comment on a few. So education, we've got a poorly trained workforce. We give a lot of grants to companies for workforce development, but we really shouldn't need that if we have a good educational system.
Yeah.
All right, two, you talked about cost of doing business. I talk often about just the cost of living in Rhode Island,
Well, yeah.
which I attribute to something I call local inflation. Cost of living in New England, in Rhode Island, is not because God has ordained that the Northeast will have a high cost of living. It's because of public policy. It's because of too much spending. It's because of what I call local. High cost of living is local inflation. Agree?
Yeah, to a large extent. You also have growth restrictions and things that prevent housing. And also the problem then, it also feeds back to labor. Housing's not independent of that. Someone from the Midwest thinking, I have a possible job opening in Rhode Island. There's no way I can afford to live there. And so you don't get that in-migration. And that just makes the population remain largely stagnant. Yeah, there's just a lot
And
of
all
things
those
here.
high costs, like I said, do not come from God above. They're because of
No.
poor public policy, right?
Yeah, and just the lack of momentum changing it. In some ways, we do things like God forbid, we have a sales tax holiday. So what's the subliminal on that? We're a high tax state and darn proud of it. I mean, it doesn't work. In a visual age, you don't want to do that. But we do that stuff all the time. During the pandemic, what were we known for? Our unemployment rate when we try and push tourism. So if you make an organizational diagram, Rhode Island has the right boxes, but our arrows are all screwed up. The good news is we could fix that, but I don't see any momentum to doing it because we're not set up for success in a post-manufacturing economy.
I want to get to that in a second. I'm going to bring in a third factor that I think is very important. I think that's high energy and high electricity prices.
Yeah.
Clearly a factor in running a business, especially a manufacturing business that uses a lot of energy, but for family budgets as well. The high cost of electricity. In fact, overall, blue states power, deep blue states like ours is almost twice as much as red states. And in fact, this one nonpartisan group I looked at just this morning called SaveOnEnergy.com just ranked Rhode Island tied for fifth in the continental U.S. for highest electricity prices in the continental U.S. Alaska and Hawaii have a lot of reasons why they're out there. They're not continental. Energy is that anything you specifically look at, or you just think it kind of plays into the overall weak business climate?
No, it clearly plays in. I mean, there's no doubt, but there's no direct measure of that per se, And so if the high energy costs hurt in migration, it shows up in population, labor force, all that. So it's in the numbers, but there's no meaningful way to separate it out. But it matters. And we're also at the end of the pipe, so to speak, for electricity, which has a part to do with it. But,
right.
We need to be more innovative. And I think that we've probably got to scrutinize some of the rate hikes that go through, that the game, they ask for double what they want. We say, oh, we're going to be vigilant and give half of that. And then they laugh all the way back to their place.
So the question comes back to the General Assembly, our governor, leadership, public policy, politicians. We have these perpetually bad rankings. We're in a recession now, and you just said it, but you don't sense that anybody is interested in doing anything about it. Agree?
They don't know how. I hate to be honest with you, but they don't really know how. They're not set up for it. I've talked to you about this. We need in-house due diligence so we can gauge policies for their viability, their geographic industrial scope, whatever, and add the word no. We don't do that. So you get kind of silly stuff like the millionaire's tax that's going to raise all this
Well,
money. Show me the methodology. There was
exactly
none.
my point. We don't know how because we don't want to know how because Rhode Island politicians are bought off on the myth that we started our show with, that we can tax corporations at high rates, we can tax families and individuals at high rates if they're wealthy. We can spend more money, cause more local inflation. We can do all the things that hurt an economy, that hurt family and business budgets.
Yeah.
And they're bought off on this myth that that is the way to run a government. And so they don't want to hear any dissenting narrative on that because they believe they're on a path, this mythical path that will produce prosperity, and it just won't.
Also, I will add to that. Back in the manufacturing era, when an economy got out of recovery, it turned itself around. Post-manufacturing, economies don't turn themselves around, but they're stuck in that mindset that, well, when the economy improves, everything's going to come back the way it was. It never does. In post-manufacturing, you have to earn growth by reinventing yourself and making yourself more competitive. As we've been talking about, we didn't do that after the pandemic. We've done a few things. There are some long-term things that are in the horizon for education and labor force. I applaud, but those are going to take time. So here we are flat-footed.
And just like we talked about with the post I put up of yours, that over 2.5 decades, our manufacturing employment base has disappeared. These public policies have been slowly eroding confidence and in our economy, have slowly contributed to a weakening business climate for decades. And it's going to take many years, if not decades, to turn it all around. But it's going to take a committed effort, some leadership somewhere in the General Assembly with a governor's going to have to say, you know what? We got to fix education. We got to reduce energy costs. We got to reduce taxes. We got to get rid of all this red tape regulation. It's going to take a committed leadership to turn this ship around. Do you see any of that out there, Professor?
A little bit, not much. I mean, there's some very good and dedicated people, but they kind of get lost in the shuffle. I think that what we really need to have is an accurate and honest assessment of our strengths and weaknesses. But if we do that, the weaknesses are going to hurt. And I think they've kind of stayed away from that. Remember that we're a kind of unique situation in the state. We discussed this before I went on this morning, is that the legislature runs a state, but they never get critiqued with the media polls. And they should. They're getting away with murder. And
right,
so
the governor's ratings, right,
yeah,
right.
I refer to it as a magnificent scam. And the media keeps doing it. I mean, collectively, we've got some really good people in the media. They keep making the same mistake. I have to conclude, collectively at least, they have the learning curve of a goldfish.
No, so the bottom line is the media is supposed to be holding lawmakers and elected officials and other appointed officials accountable, and they're not. We're letting them get away with killing our state's business climate.
They often are apologists, just kind of going along with it, not asking the good questions, not doing follow-up the way they need to. Even though there's some good people in the media, they just, remember, half of our elected officials go unopposed. So you don't murder anyone, you're reelected. Okay, so that's another part of the problem, is that we need a downsizing of the legislature so people actually have to compete against someone else, say what they believe instead of, hi, how's your family kind of thing.
Well, that's why we're spending our time doing shows like this and talking to try to raise awareness, because we're not going to change the policies unless we change the politicians, and ultimately that's up to the voters. So we can blame the governor, we can blame the General Assembly, but we can also put some blame on voters who just keep reelecting the people who just keep leading us down these dark paths.
Partly, yeah. I mean, we need term limits. We need line item veto.
Yep.
But the legislature, which runs a state but says it doesn't, won't allow line item vetoes. I've been pushing for that for decades and stuff. That would really just make some waves, cause some little differences there, say no to some stuff. But the way it's done now, the governor can send something to the legislature and they just say, no, throw it out and do whatever they want. And they get away with it. That's the crazy thing. Where's the media?
Unless we're committed to the reform, unless the media holds politicians accountable, we're just going to keep hearing the same happy talk that I referred to earlier on. Oh, look, we reduced that fee by a little
I
bit,
know.
but they don't tell you that over here we
By
raised all those other
$20.
ones.
Oh my God, that's going to be decisive. Oh my God. Yeah,
Yeah, I remember
know.
they made a big deal out of reducing some tax from 350 to 300, like that was going to save Rhode Island.
Yeah, I know. It altered us, right? I know.
Yeah.
I think I'm not from Rhode Island, or like from New Jersey, but some of the stuff the state does, for lack of a better term, is cute. If there's 100 jobs more added, stop the presses, and that's a major headline. Well, what percentage of the total is that? I enjoy this a lot, and the state, people upstate make so many errors. It's great for the classes I teach. I can't tell you enough about that.
He is Len Lardaro. It is the Current Conditions Index. And both say Rhode Island is in a recession, and yet lawmakers just won't respond. Professor Lardaro, thank you once again for all the work you do in our state and for joining us today on In the Dugout.
Nice being here. Always good being with you. Take care.
All right, Professor, thank you. And to our viewers, thank you for joining in today. So until next game, Mike Stenhouse out. We'll see you then.